It's been 3 weeks since I moved out of the apartment I shared with Richard for 8 years. I thought moving into this old house in Brooklyn would be a fresh start, but something is wrong. Very wrong. At first, it was just small things I could easily ignore. The creaking of the wooden floorboards in the middle of the night, objects that seemed to move on their own, that constant feeling of being watched. But before I tell you my story, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more videos. Have you ever felt like the mirrors in your house reflect something different? Not something scary or supernatural, but as if the image is slightly delayed compared to your movements? That's how it all started. At first, I thought it was just exhaustion from sleepless nights since the breakup. After all, it's not easy to end an 8-year relationship, especially when your ex-husband refuses to accept it's over. In the first week, Richard called every day. Then, he stopped completely. The silence should have brought me relief, but it only deepened my unease. The walls of the house, once welcoming, began to feel closer, as if the rooms were gradually shrinking. The hallways seemed longer at night, and the shadows moved in impossible ways. "You're imagining things, Julia," I tell myself as I make coffee in the kitchen. It's 3:17 a.m., and sleep has abandoned me again. The hot liquid slides down my throat, bringing a fleeting moment of comfort. That's when I realize I don't remember turning on the coffee maker. A cold shiver runs down my spine. The silence of the house is broken only by the ticking of the living room clock, which seems to slow down gradually, as if time itself is losing its consistency. I approach the kitchen door and look down the dark hallway. The streetlight shining through the living room window now has a sickly green tint. "Richard?" My voice trembles, and I immediately regret speaking. Something moves in the darkness, not a normal movement, but as if the shadow itself has come to life. The air grows heavy, hard to breathe. My heart pounds in my chest as I reach for the light switch. The light doesn't turn on. Footsteps, slow, dragging, coming from the living room. The metallic jingle of keys I was sure I left on the entry table clinks softly. The temperature drops sharply, and I can see my breath forming small clouds in the air. Have you ever felt that moment of total paralysis, when your body simply refuses to move? That's exactly how I felt. "Did you miss me?" Richard's voice echoes through the house, but there's something deeply wrong with it. It's as if other voices are speaking alongside it, overlapping, creating a dissonance that makes my stomach churn. His footsteps approach the kitchen, and I finally manage to move. I run toward the back door, but something is wrong with the layout of the house. The hallway that should lead to the exit now seems to stretch infinitely, the walls twisting at impossible angles. The doors I pass begin to show the same room. The living room, where Richard stands, watching me with a smile that stretches beyond the limits of his face. If you've ever had a nightmare where you try to scream and no sound comes out, you know exactly how I felt in that moment. But this wasn't a nightmare. It was something much worse. The impact against the wall was brutal. I felt my body disconnect for a moment, as if my consciousness floated a few inches above my head. The last thing I saw before everything went dark was Richard's face approaching, his eyes completely black, reflecting a void that seemed to suck all the light around it. And then, darkness. But it wasn't normal darkness. It was something alive, pulsating, conscious, and it had plans for me. Have you ever wondered what happens when we die? Well, we'll soon find out together. Because what I found on the other side of the darkness would forever change my understanding of life, death, and everything in between. If you're curious to know what happened next, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because this story is far from over. Tell me in the comments, have you ever felt like your house changed after someone important left it? That the walls hold memories that sometimes come to life? Darkness has texture. That was the first thing I noticed when I opened my eyes. It wasn't like being in a dark room. It was like floating in an ocean of thick, viscous black ink. There was no sense of body, only consciousness. And that presence, huge, ancient, watching. Calm down, take a deep breath. Well, theoretically, you don't need to breathe here, but the idea is the same. A cheerful voice cuts through the darkness. A soft light turns on, revealing a waiting room that looks like it came straight out of an 80s office, with moss-green velvet chairs and ambient music I recognize as a bossa nova version of The Girl from Ipanema. Sitting behind a beige Formica desk is a woman in her 60s, her gray hair tied in a flawless bun, wearing tortoiseshell glasses and a badge that reads, Mrs. Zelda, Transition Guide. She smiles warmly as she types something on an old computer. Let me see. Julia Santos, 34 years old, severe head trauma after impact. Complicated situation, she murmurs, adjusting her glasses. You're in what we call the in-between place. You know when you're watching a soap opera and there's that black screen for a few seconds before the commercial? It's kind of like that. So I can't finish the sentence. Dead? Not exactly. Let's say you're in a video call with a terrible connection. Sometimes it drops, sometimes it comes back. But you haven't completely hung up yet, she explains, pulling a file from a floating drawer that simply appears in the air. The problem is that something is interfering with the signal. The walls of the room begin to ripple softly, as if responding to something. The ambient music distorts for a second, turning into static noise before returning to normal. Mrs. Zelda frowns, concerned. This shouldn't be happening, she murmurs, typing frantically. There's something that came with you. The computer starts displaying strange codes, symbols that seem to move on their own. The temperature in the room plummets, and that feeling of being watched returns with full force. Have you ever felt like something was breathing on your neck, but when you turned around, there was nothing there? Multiply that feeling by 1,000. Oh no. Mrs. Zelda stands up abruptly. Julia, dear, you need to go back. Now. Something is using your body as a bridge. Something that shouldn't be here. If this continues... Before she can finish, the walls collapse, revealing that living darkness again. But now there's something more. Something moving in the shadows. Something with the shape of Richard but larger, distorted, impossible. His smile stretches literally from ear to ear, and his eyes are as empty as the space between stars. Found you, his voice resonates, multiplied by thousands of whispers. Did you really think you could just leave me? That you could escape? Mrs. Zelda steps between us, her eyes now, glowing with a supernatural light. She doesn't belong to you. This is not your domain. Not yet, the thing that was once Richard replies, its body twisting at impossible angles. But it will be soon. All those years feeding on it, all the fear, all the guilt. It was so easy to create a door, and now, the darkness begins to solidify, forming shadowy tentacles that advance toward us. Mrs. Zelda shouts something in an ancient language, her words glowing in the air like blue fire. An intense light begins to emanate from the floor, forming complex symbols. Julia, listen, she shouts as she holds the shadows at bay. Your body is still alive. You need to go back and break the connection before it's too late. Look for Madame Carmen on Oscura Hill. She'll know what... The light explodes, hurling me through a tunnel of distorted memories. I see flashes of my relationship with Richard, but now I notice signs I hadn't seen before. The small manipulations, the gradual isolation, the way he always seemed to feed on my fear. Have you ever felt like you were living a lie, but only realized it too late? Tell me in the comments about your experience, because what I discovered next changed everything I thought I knew about relationships. and about reality. If you want to find out what Madame Carmen has to do with all this and how I faced the darkness, hit the bell. Because in the next chapter, well, let's just say the line between the natural and the supernatural will become even thinner. I wake up with the metallic taste of blood in my mouth and a throbbing pain in my head. The cold floor of the living room seems to pulse beneath my body. How long was I out? The walls still seem to move, but now I can see something more. Ancient symbols, almost invisible, glowing faintly in the peeling paint. With effort, I drag myself to the door. The phone lying in the hallway shows 3:33 a.m., the witching hour, as my grandmother used to say. The cracked screen reflects a face that no longer seems entirely mine. There's something different in my eyes, something that came back with me from that place. Oscura Hill, Madame Carmen, I murmur, remembering Mrs. Zelda's words. I know that hill, a narrow, winding alley in the heart of Brooklyn Heights, where they say the witches of New York gathered in the 19th century. Would you believe me if I told you some of them are still there? My legs tremble as I climb the steep hill. The early morning fog descends from the forested heights, turning the streetlights into ghostly circles of light. A black cat watches me from atop a colonial wall, its eyes reflecting ancient knowledge. Madame Carmen's house is exactly what you wouldn't expect. A modernist structure, all glass and concrete, absurdly out of place among the historic mansions. The intercom buzzes once before the door opens on its own. "I've been waiting for you, girl." A hoarse voice comes from inside. "The tea is ready." Madame Carmen is nothing like Mrs. Zelda. She's about 40, with colorful dreadlocks and a tailored dress. Around her neck, a necklace with the same symbol I saw glowing on the walls of my house. She serves me a red tea in a Chinese porcelain cup. So he finally succeeded, huh? She sighs, lighting a cigar. Richard has always been hungry since he was a child. His mother came to me 30 years ago when she started noticing the changes, but it was already too late. What exactly is he? I ask, feeling the tea warm my body in an almost supernatural way. The right question is, what has he become? There are spaces between worlds, Julia. Emotional black holes that suck in everything around them. Richard learned to feed on fear, insecurity, and the pain of others. Every toxic relationship, every manipulation, every moment of terror, all of it opened a portal inside him. And now, a cold wind blows through the house, extinguishing the scented candles. In the reflection of the window, I see a shadow. Moving. No, several shadows, all with Richard's distorted face. He's using your near death as a bridge, Madame Carmen explains, tossing a glowing powder into the air. Your body is alive, but your soul is, let's say, vulnerable. It's the chance he's been waiting for to fully cross over to this side. And how do I stop it? Madame Carmen's smile is enigmatic. Who said you need to stop it? Sometimes the best defense is a good offense. You came back different from the in-between place, didn't you? Can you feel the power running through your veins? I look at my hands and see small arcs of blue energy dancing between my fingers. The feeling of power is intoxicating. Richard's shadows writhe, now more hesitant. His fear fed you for 8 years, Madame Carmen continues. But do you know what's stronger than fear? Anger. Especially the anger of a woman who finally realizes her own power. The shadows advance, but now I'm ready. Every moment of manipulation, every night of fear, every tear shed, it all transforms into pure energy. The walls vibrate with my newfound strength. You want a show? I shout at the shadows. Then let's dance. What happened next? Well, let's just say there are things that need to be seen to be believed. Have you ever felt like you had a dormant power within you? Something waiting for the right moment. to awaken. The night I faced my demons, literally, changed everything. But this story isn't just about the supernatural. It's about recognizing toxic patterns, finding inner strength, about rebirth. Today, the walls of my house no longer move. The mirrors reflect exactly what they should. And when I look into the eyes of my reflection, I see someone stronger, wiser, someone who is no longer afraid of the darkness because she learned to turn it into light. If you've ever been through something similar, not necessarily with supernatural entities, but with people who tried to suck your energy, share your story in the comments. Sometimes the first step to freedom is realizing we're not alone. And remember, not everything that seems supernatural is. Sometimes the real terror lies in the relationships we normalize. But that's a story for another time.